Hi, I'm Kat and I have a true crime case for you today. Oh boy, I do have one. But before we get started, the word in Romanian for today is pisică. 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 Well done guys, you just said cat. Arminda Ventura Perry was born in 1964 in Philippines. Sadly, her date of birth is unknown. She was a 20-year-old naive young Pacific Islander who fell in love with a man from the other side of the world, old enough to be her father. Flattered perhaps by the attention given to her by a Westerner and also thinking about offering her young daughter a better life, she fell prey to John Perry, who already had two broken marriages. Arminda was a hard-working young mother to a beautiful daughter. She had a close circle of family and friends, and she was well loved. Now, before I move on any further in the video, I just want to apologize in advance that I don't have a lot of photos available, so that's why you won't be seeing throughout this video as many photos as I would have liked. Arminda, known to her friends as Annabelle, was barely out of her teen years when she met John. I will refer to her from now on as Annabelle. Then, 45 years old, I think, just coming out of a nasty divorce, John had gone on a 20-day holiday in the Philippines in June 1984. Annabelle was working as a go-go dancer in a bar in Manila. According to John, he paid to have sex with her, but police say that the portrait he painted of her as a good-time girl doesn't really align with what they learned of her background. She was the daughter of a showman and boxing promoter. She was one of a family of 12, staying on at school until she was 19 years old. She became a cultural dancer, possibly switching to bar work and go-go dancing to support her baby. According to Wikipedia, go-go dancers are dancers who are employed to entertain crowds at nightclubs or other venues where music is being played. Annabelle's relationship with John blossomed. For the next 3 weeks, he spent every day and every night with her. He was just smitten and had every reason to believe that she was fond of him as well. When the time drew near for him to fly home, Annabelle told him that she didn't really want him to leave, so he suggested they get married and settle in North Wales. Annabelle agreed to this and she flew over to the UK, staying with him for 9 days at Kinnerton in February 1985, and in August 1985 she and her young daughter moved in permanently with him in his bungalow. A month later, in September 1985, they got married at Hawarden Register Office. But this marriage as well didn't stay blissful for that long, just like John's previous marriages. John gradually became annoyed when other men showed an interest in Annabelle. He soon believed that she had just married him to escape poverty in the Philippines. John Perry was born in Woolwich, London on 17th of February 1939. He was one of 2 children. He left school at 15 without any qualifications and had a variety of jobs until he joined the army as a rifleman with the Rifle Brigade in May 1957, but he was discharged on medical grounds just 3 months later. He was married twice. The first marriage in 1962 broke down, ending in divorce in 1969. He remarried again in 1973, but again the marriage ended in divorce in 1978. John was described as having morbid interest in things, but he could be charming, romantic, a very polite man and hardworking, and he was a really good provider. However, there was a very dark side to John. He had a violence that he couldn't quite control, and he wouldn't be violent only to his partners but also their sisters or brothers or parents, and he wouldn't do it all the time behind closed doors. He would do it in front of friends or other family members in public places, as if he couldn't control this violence, but also as if he knew or he felt that the level of control and fear he inflicted would never get him into any kind of legal issues, problems with police, or even arrests. It feels as if John believed that by showing his violence to people, nobody would turn on him because they would be too scared. And he would prey on vulnerable people or those with less strength than him. I think it's safe to say that he was the typical figure of abusers. Charming, romantic, and polite at first until he strikes and doesn't stop. At the time of this case, John was 52 years old and he was an aircraft fitter living on Myrtle Avenue, Higher Kinnerton, near Chester. According to witnesses, John was violent towards Annabelle, his current wife. At least twice, she left him and walked out, but he managed to track her down and took her back home. Annabelle's sister remembers an incident when John and Annabelle visited her family in the Philippines. Annabelle and John got into an argument and he became really aggressive. Her sister could hear the argument, but some of their visitors claimed that John had hit Annabelle, punching her in the face and banging her head against the wall. Of course, that her sister asked John why he did that, and that's when John went towards her and grabbed her neck. She fell over and that's when he began strangling her. He had to be pulled off by her husband and some friends. John had been working night shifts and he would accuse Annabelle of bringing men into their bed whilst he was away at work. He was getting more and more violent. If at first he would start abusing her by calling her names, soon it turned physical and violent, as you can probably tell by now. After being in the marriage for 7 years and being constantly accused of cheating, Annabelle allegedly did go out with another man, which obviously is not a great thing to do, but it doesn't really justify what will happen later. And also, sometimes when someone accuses you for so long of something you didn't do, some people will just think, you know what, if he's saying that and I'm not doing it, I'll do it now because it's the same thing anyway, right? When John got out of hand with her, Annabelle would spend nights at her friend's house just to get away from him. And other times she would spend nights with men just to get away from John. A few months before the tragic events of today's case, John told immigration authorities a bunch of lies about Annabelle in the hopes that they would remove her from the country and send her back to the Philippines. When that failed, he started contemplating a sinister plan. And in February 1991, he executed that plan. In January 1991, Annabelle would make the final decision to return to him after leaving yet again. But at the same time, she was also getting ready for a divorce, even seeing a solicitor about this. Unfortunately, this would ultimately cost her her life. The day before the tragic events of today's case, in February 1991, John received a letter from solicitors fixing a date for the final divorce hearing and a settlement of £15,000, the equivalent of £31,000 in today's money. John had just discovered that Annabelle was allegedly having an affair with a local man, so he decided that the perfect murder would be an option to paying out the £15,000 settlement. But when Annabelle was reported missing, not by him, but by concerned neighbors and friends, his plan went out the window. According to John, Annabelle enjoyed the company of other men and she was occasionally away for several days. The neighbors and her friends, after not seeing her for 2 weeks, became alarmed, as this was unusual for Annabelle, who was by then 27 years old, so they decided to alert the police. On 28th of February 1981, police visited the neighbor who was also her friend, and the neighbor did tell police that Annabelle would sometimes be away for a few days, but never for that long, and she would always keep in contact with her friends. The friend also told police about conversations Annabelle had with the friend. She talked about the frustrations in her marriage and how she began the divorce process. After chatting with the neighbor, police knocked on John's door. The police began a routine missing persons inquiry. Detective Chief Superintendent John Cook and other officers visited their home to ask John some questions, specifically because his wife was missing, but he wasn't the one to report her missing. So this, of course, to the police seemed quite odd. John told the officers that he hadn't reported his wife missing because he thought she had gone off with a man, as she had in the past, but she always returned when she needed money. John even told police that she was working as a sex worker and he didn't have anything against it because she enjoyed doing it. He added he had begun divorce proceedings and would live alone with his cat called Katie. But the police were still suspicious, especially because John didn't really want them inside of his house. He was stood there, propped against the door, trying to hide whatever was behind him in the inside of the house. The police asked him if he knew this man that Annabelle went with, but John just told them not to worry because Annabelle will be back. The police didn't buy this, so they really asked to go inside the house. But they were met with a stomach-churning nightmare, one which none of them could have imagined and one which none of them will ever forget. The officers were confronted by a scene of cold-blooded brutality that can only match the fictional activities of Dr. Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. They literally stumbled across John in the middle of butchering his wife's body and preparing it for sickening disposal. Detective John Cook, who would lead the murder investigation, said, quote, "The smell that was in the bungalow is something that will remain with us forever. The thought of an individual going to such lengths defies comprehension." End of quote. John Perry carried out his gruesome task with such clinical efficiency that even the pathologist, Dr. Donald Wade, was not sure at first that they were dealing with human remains at all. Detective Cook is convinced that if the concerned neighbors wouldn't have alerted the police about Annabelle's disappearance, John would have gotten rid of her body without a trace. John had already purchased a large amount of washing up detergent, preparing to clean up the scene. 30 police officers were involved with the case, interviewing 120 people. As a matter of routine, police officers asked John to look around the house in the hope of finding something which would give them a clue as to Annabelle's whereabouts. In the kitchen, the officers detected a strange smell. A bloody knife was on the table and there were bloodstains on the floor. Katie, the cat, ran across the room, stopping beside two rubbish bags containing a quantity of chopped meat placed close to the entrance of the garage. John sent the cat away, but the cat just ignored him and she just began rummaging into the top of one of the bags, dragging out a piece of red meat, and she began to chew at it. Apologizing to the police officers, uncomfortable by this point, John explained that a friend of his, who is a butcher, gave him some meat, but the police were just not buying it. They soon started making the connections. An officer noticed a blood-stained hacksaw and screwdriver near the sink. Beside the tools was a medical encyclopedia open at a page featuring the human skeleton. The officers alerted detectives and during a more detailed search found two large wine fermenting bins in the garage which contained meat. Some of it had been burned, other pieces cooked, and other portions were still raw. The bin also contained human organs. A further search found body parts in the boot of John's car. In studying the body, Home Office pathologist Dr. Donald Wade found that certain portions were missing and he concluded that John fed pieces of his wife to the cat Katie. John had talked to an ex-butcher about how best to methodically cut up a pork carcass, what tools are required, and he was even told that cooked human flesh was just like pork, and also that you need to drain as much blood as possible. John dismembered Annabelle's body in the bath, baked her bit by bit in the kitchen stove, including her severed head. He also used drills and saws to dismember her. Cooked pieces of flesh were found stuffed into two bags in the kitchen. Some of the roast flesh was even fed to the family cat. There was blood all over the living room walls and furniture, indicating that John had violently stamped on his wife as she was fighting for her life. But John denies this, saying that he strangled her and she didn't put up a fight after he had taken a knife away from her. He then took her body out to the countryside near Oswald's tree and took it back the following night. It was then that he cut up and cooked her body in order to dispose of it. He buried her eyes and brain in a forest, but he says it wasn't to get rid of vital organs which could have identified her cause of death. He also carried around 20 gallons of diluted blood back and forth in a bucket to be buried in forests, adjacent fields and ditches. Parts of her body were kept in acid tanks at his workplace, and if he wouldn't have been caught, these parts would have simply disappeared. John eventually admitted to killing Annabelle, but he said he can't remember it. Not surprising. He said on that day they had an argument about the divorce and how Annabelle didn't want to get divorced and she was just waving a knife around in the living room, threatening to kill herself if they do divorce because she loved him so much. So he began struggling with her for the knife so she doesn't hurt herself, but she punched him and he then conveniently blacked out. The last thing he remembered was hitting his wife with a closed fist, trying to stop the chaos, and he then found her dead. And he knew no one would believe he didn't mean to kill her. Dr. Donald Waite reconstructed most of Annabelle's head, and although they were not able to establish a cause of death, they were able to determine that she had not been strangled. Bone fragments indicated she received a vicious blow to the back of her head. John had also lied about killing his wife in the living room. The physical evidence proved that she had been killed in the bath. But John lied about some other things as well. For example, his divorce. Police had also spoken to John's co-workers in the factory where he worked. According to them, John was enraged that he would have to pay Annabelle £15,000 as divorce settlement. He speculated, according to the co-workers, that there must be another way to avoid paying that amount. But he told police that he was the one who started the divorce procedure. John Perry's ex-wife, 49-year-old Julia, saw the warning signs. They got married on 13th of October 1962 at Leighton Register Office. At the time of this case, Julia, living in Essex, felt like this was a tragedy waiting to happen. John had a side to him that could really get to you. He had always been a good family provider and he was never a drinker. They have a daughter together, Deborah, who was 28 years old in 1991, and John loved their daughter dearly. Julia said that John beat her all the time, even through to her 8th month of pregnancy. She never went to a doctor because he threatened her he would kill her, and she knew he meant it. She was beaten, punched and spat on. He loved to just degrade her. He would hit her for the slightest reason. She once even took out an injunction against him after he tried to kill her. He would even beat her just because she would ask for their baby's light to be left on at night. If she was in his bad books, he would make her sit on the stairs out of the way. His attitude was like a reign of terror. As soon as you would wake up, you'd know you couldn't put a foot wrong. Julia fully believes that he is evil, and the evil just grew with him as he grew older. Julia was even told by a doctor that she can't carry on taking any more beatings. John even beat Julia's father, threatened her mother and attacked her own sister. In 1989 at Christmas, Julia did meet Annabelle, and she did see an argument between John and Annabelle where he blamed her for a crease in his shirt. The marriage ended in 1968, and by then Julia had enough of his aggressive behavior. Julia remarried later. At the time of his trial in November 1991, Julia lived in Essex with her family, and she is haunted by what he did to Annabelle. She finds it hard to come to terms with the way she died, and she feels like she could have stopped everything, but the police told her there was nothing she could have done. John just reveled in violence, and Julia thinks that he actually enjoyed dismembering Annabelle. She was like a lamb to the slaughter, Julia said. After their marriage broke down, Julia knew that he remarried, and she later heard he got remarried a third time, this time with Annabelle. She wanted to warn Annabelle, but she was scared she would just sound like a jealous ex. After Julia, John married Susan in Hainault, Essex in March 1973 at Hainault Methodist Church. Susan and John lived for the first 2 years of their marriage in France, where he worked as a precision engineer. Susan first found out about Annabelle's murder in May 1991, when the police called her after he was arrested. She was shocked, but really she wasn't surprised. When they first met, John was really very affectionate and romantic. He was a gentleman, he was polite, nice, but this was before they got married. After 6 months into their marriage, he started beating her and his temper couldn't be controlled. He once tried to strangle her to the point where she nearly passed out. She really believed that he was going to kill her. He would hit her with fists and feet. Everything would have to be done properly or he would lose his temper. But to outsiders, they used to put on a front, pretending to have the perfect marriage. In Susan's words, after a beating, he would take her for a visit to the coast until the bruises had faded away. If she would have told anyone about what he was doing to her, Susan believed he would have killed her. They were married for 5 years before breaking up, divorcing in 1978. Both Julie and Susan believe that they are lucky they survived. If they wouldn't have left him, they think they would be dead. They both became friends during the trial for Annabelle's murder, and they feel that with the sentence John received, he is paying for what he did to them as well. Julia has said that if he would ever be released and go into another relationship, she would go to the nearest police station with Susan and warn her, just like she should have done with Susan and Annabelle. During his trial at Mold Crown Court, John Perry showed zero remorse. He denied murder, but he admitted to manslaughter, claiming that he was provoked by his wife because she would sleep around so much he just had to kill her, and that's the defense his team went with. But of course that the jury didn't buy it. Of course that he is blaming the victim. Something that held some weight was John's view of women. He believed that women were inferior. When he met Annabelle in the Philippines, he was tired of Western women, of their assertiveness and independence, because their rights needed to be earned in his view. John Perry was found guilty and jailed for life. The jury took 5 hours and 15 minutes to find him guilty on a majority verdict of 10-2. 2 members of the jury believed that John was justified in his actions. His ex-wife, Julia, was in court to witness the last day of the trial, sitting alongside his other ex-wife, Susan. John, at this moment, is still in prison. He is now 83 years old, and sadly, I couldn't find out exactly what happened to Annabelle's daughter. I don't know if she remained in the UK or she returned to the Philippines, to Annabelle's family. There are a lot of rumors around this case, specifically around Annabelle and her history of sex working. All I could find out came from John's mouth, no one else, and some of John's friends. It could have just been his view on women in general. Maybe that's why he said that she was a sex worker, really. I mean, I don't really know, but regardless, one thing is for sure. Annabelle didn't deserve to die. He chose to kill her rather than pay the settlement for the divorce. The abuse was the reason in the divorce paperwork, and apart from the £15,000, he was also supposed to pay her spousal maintenance every month. And I think that, considering of how he chose to dispose of her body, goes to show how little he thinks of women. After all, they are inferior to him. And with this, I got to the end of today's video. This was a really disgusting, gruesome, and also heartbreaking case. Sadly, I would have loved to know what happened with Annabelle's daughter, but I couldn't find any information around this. And also, I think that there are a lot of rumors surrounding this case, specifically, like I mentioned, Annabelle, also because she is from the Philippines, and a lot of people are saying that young women from Philippines, they usually look for financial opportunities to leave the country, to move to the West, or to the UK, to the US, and they usually prey on older men to do that, to get married with them just for the money. I don't know how true this is. I mean, I can't judge anyone by their actions or by where they are from. I know that there are good people everywhere in the world, just as there are bad people everywhere in the world. I also know specifically about about women from Philippines, even though they do get married with older men. I'm not saying all of them, but from what I have heard, even though those who get married with older men, for example, male brides and things like that, usually Philippine women, they tend to be very dedicated and very committed to the person that they marry. But even if they do marry them for money, as far as I know from my own understanding, they are very faithful and they will stick by the man they married for the rest of their lives. So yeah, this is what I know. And like I said, it's nothing to do with which country you are from. Women and men, both of them, they can be from wherever they can be. There will be good people and bad people everywhere in this world. So thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know what do you guys think about this case in the comment section down below. Do you really think that Annabelle was a sex worker, and do you think that she really deserved to die, as John said? Thank you again, take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!